this will be pretty much lesson 3, kind of going through all this. We won't do all 613 points of law. That would take, quite a while. And to go through the law that much is not really where we need to be. We need to be more into grace and right division and mid-acts dispensationalism, the revelation of the mystery, things like that, and focusing more so on that. And, studies like this are not bad. It illuminates, like Proverbs did, the book of Proverbs. We want the whole word of God. We want the whole word of truth. So there's nothing wrong with that. But to continuously focus on the law all the time, it's probably not where we want to remain, so to say. We want to, go back into, Paul's epistles and right division and studies on dispensations and things like that. So it's good to park here, look at these things, and understand just how much we can't follow the law.
So a lot of it seemed to be common sense too, so, and a lot we can learn from it.
Yeah. And a lot of the things we do today.
Yeah.
Because even when you see the ceremonial washings, what they would say is water baptism is, you need to wash, especially after, touching a dead body, you need to wash yourselves with water, and in issues and matters of blood, you need to wash your hands. Mm-hmm. You need to run running water with your hand. That's a law, that's a rule. And then that was, over the course of time, plugged into, hospitals and schools and society.
It's common sense.
Yeah. Well, it's common sense now. In the Dark Ages, you did.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And that's why plagues spread like crazy.
But in a sense, God was keeping his people, healthy and giving them good practices.
Well, and then you'll see a phrase we'll look at in some of the laws today. It'll say that's why you'll live long on the earth. We'll get started. We're going into part 3 of our study. We're going through the question that gets asked is, can we keep all the commandments? And the common thing we hear about is you read the book of John, you hear about, if you love me, keep my commandments. And so it's talking about not only the 10 commandments that we see so commonly, but actually when you read through the Bible, you see all about, when you read Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, and so on, you find there's actually 613 commandments. And when you read some of them, you say, well, I love the Lord, I love Jesus, I want to go. The question is, can you actually keep all the commandments that we find? We've gone through 2 lessons ago, the commandments concerning citizenship and brotherhood. We saw just through, I believe, the 10 to 14 commandments dealing with those out of the 613, they can't be kept. We went through last study, when we looked at business practices, and there was about 10 to 14 commandments on that. We saw no business in town keeps the commandments because there's certain rules and laws dealing with usury, certain laws dealing with usury, interest, certain things with different groups of people, Jews, Gentiles, and what they're to do and not do. And so, were they to uphold these laws, we see that they couldn't do it. So we saw that. Today we're going to go through and look at a certain topic dealing with agriculture and animals. And of course, diving into the Bible, we're seeing it in proper context, how Israel in the Old Testament was to deal with these laws. And of course, in the New Testament, these laws will be written supernaturally in the hearts of the little flock of Israel and in their kingdom. And so we see this here, that there's going to be about, again, 10 to 14, say more so on 14 laws or commandments dealing with, how are they supposed to deal with agriculture? How are they supposed to deal with animals? In, say, the millennial kingdom or in the Old Testament, how are they supposed to deal with this as God commanded them to do so? And so we're going to take a look at this. And just as we had gone through the book of Proverbs, we found theme after theme after theme throughout the chapters, throughout the books, and there were certain common themes that kept popping up. As we go through the law, we find the same thing, and we're finding that there's certain themes that keep popping up throughout the 613 points of law, and we can categorize them, find them, and study them according to the themes that actually end up popping up. So we can go through that, and we can see this here as we look at them in proper context and rightly divide the word of truth and see how it applies to the proper audiences. So we can see that there. So we're going to look at the laws, dealing with Israel, and in this case, the laws dealing with their agriculture and their animals. And if at the end of the study you still think you can keep these commandments, they would have to be kept 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year perfectly. Remember some of what Paul said. Paul said the law in Galatians 3:24 and 25 is a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. That was the purpose of the law. That was the point of it. And that we know from Romans 3:19 and 20 that the purpose of the law is that it's the knowledge of sin. That's what the law does. It gives us the knowledge of sin. And of course, Galatians 3 again is a schoolmaster, therefore, to bring us unto Christ. And we know that in James 2, verse 10 and 11, that if you break one law, it's as if you broke all 613 points of law. So just as we said in our previous studies, if you keep 612 points of law, but you break one, it's as if you broke 613 points of law. So again, when we know the law, this is not some evil plot that God's come up with. It's not an evil thing. The law is not evil. It's holy. Paul says this in Romans chapter 7, verse 11, but it's not how you're saved. It's not a method of salvation. You'll hear people say, well, I keep the laws, I keep the commandments, I'm saved by the law, or I can be saved by doing the law. That's not how anybody is saved today. You're not saved by doing it or keeping it or getting back into it or whatever it is. The law won't save you. It does show you the knowledge of sin. That's what the law does. What we are doing as the body of Christ, saved by grace through faith and the dispensation of grace, studying, preaching Christ according to the revelation of the mystery, as we study the law, we know Romans 6:14, we're not under the law. And yet, as we go into this, and I shouldn't say yet or but or contradict that by any point, what we're doing is we're learning some good spiritual lessons out of this. We go through this, we see that for example, last week we went through business practices. We saw it's right to have good business ethics. It's right to not wrong somebody in business practices. We know Paul says in Romans that, be not slothful in business, and the law cross refers and kind of builds on that or kind of confirms, let's not be slothful in business. Let's do things right. Let's do things. So we're learning some good spiritual lessons out of it. But to say that we are the people of the book of Leviticus, that we should do these things, that's not going to work. And same with the book of Numbers, same with the book of Exodus. And so we can learn a lot from it, and we want to learn a lot from it. But to apply ourselves directly into it, it's just not going to fit. So we can come to this and read this as somebody else's mail, and we can learn the spiritual lessons out of somebody else's mail. And that would be Old Testament Israel. So we're going to learn from it and benefit from it and gain, spiritual lessons out of this. So again, as we go into it this week, we're learning some of the laws and rules dealing with agriculture and animals. And we'll start with the first one. That's in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 19. As we go there, we won't go through too many cross-references. We don't want to go through a multitude of them, and a lot of them are going to have the same cross-references, dealing even with different commandments, rules, and laws, and so forth. But let's see, Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 19. That reads, "Ye shall keep my statutes. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with a mingled seed, neither shall a garment mingled of linen and woolen come upon thee." So that last part's interesting. We're going to get into that in a minute about garments. But he says, "You shall keep my statutes." That's a given. That's kind of what Israel needed to at least try to do. He says, "Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind," and that's kind of what we're looking at. This is the first part of Leviticus 19:19 we're looking at today. The first law, the first rule, the first part of dealing is at least with animals is not to crossbreed cattle of different species. That's a law. We may say that's an option today in farming. That's good advice, but over here it was the commandment. It was God's law. You're not to do that. You could, you don't want to go around being a lawbreaker. On top of what we had already studied about citizenship and brotherhood, on top of business practices, you had these laws too. And we see that here that thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. So if the cattle had its own mind, you were to, take care of the cattle and make sure the cattle didn't gender with a diverse kind. So we see that there, and then it also has its cross-reference. If we look at Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 9. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 9. We see its cross-reference here, just as it's mentioned in Leviticus, we see it also in Deuteronomy. Let's see. 22:9. Here's where we see it again. It says, thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with diverse seeds, lest the fruit of thy seed which thou hast sown and the fruit of thy vineyard be defiled. Thou shalt not plow with an ox and an ass together. Thou shalt not wear a garment of diverse sorts, as of woolen and linen together. So it's almost like we're reading the same thing. It's a little bit different, of course, differently detailed, differently worded, but we're seeing the same concepts coming up again about not making sure or making sure that you're not sowing the vineyard with diverse seeds, fruit with diverse seeds as well, plowing an ox with an ass, not letting the cattle gender with a diverse kind, and sow your field with mingled seed. And then, of course, that latter part is talking about neither shall a garment mingled again. It's all about diversity and mingling. You're not to have things, you keep things pure, whether it's cattle, whether it's fruit, and even when it comes down to the garments, which is sort of a sidetrack issue, but it does make an interesting point, which is going to clear up something we've been reading about for maybe 20, 30, 40 years. And I'll get to that right now. We're seeing about the cattle. That answers the first thing about agriculture and animals. That's where we are today. Leviticus 19:19, which is Deuteronomy 22. But then we see that part there, the last part, where it says, neither shall a garment mingled of linen and woolen come upon thee. So again, it's all about making sure that when you have that cattle, it doesn't gender with diverse kind, and when you have seed, that it doesn't get mingled, and when you have thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed. So it's not about mingling multiple things together, and whether it be your clothing, whether it be your cattle, whether it be your seed, you're not mingling multiple things together. We see that also just now in Deuteronomy 22:9-11. You don't mingle multiple things together. The whole point of saying this for so long, if we go to Matthew chapter 3, you're going to get the answer to a question as to John the Baptist. Matthew chapter 3. We're going to look at verse 4. Matthew chapter 3, verse 4. As John the Baptist shows up to Israel, he is trying to keep all the laws as much as he possibly can, and this is what somebody looks like who's trying to keep all the laws as much as he possibly can. It says, and the same John had his raiment of camel's hair, and a leathern girdle about his loins, and his meat was locusts and wild honey. And I see there in verse 4, it says, and his raiment of camel's hair. Now, why would he have raiment of camel's hair? A lot of people read that and they don't, it doesn't make sense to him. Why would he go around wearing camel's hair? Why is he doing that? It goes back to what we just saw in Deuteronomy 22:11 and in Leviticus 19. He's not going to wear two garments of a diverse sort. He's not going to wear a certain garment he's obeying the law as much as he can. He remembers what Deuteronomy says. He remembers what Leviticus says. He's going to wear only camel's hair, nothing more, nothing less, camel's hair. And he knows that that's what's going to be that's going to be right according to the law. Maybe it could be some other type of animal skin or whatever for clothing, but it's only going to be one thing. It's not going to be mingled together. That's why he wore camel's hair. And so, one of your long lost questions may have been, or somebody else's long lost question would be, why did he wear that? What's he doing wearing that? And of course, the rest of it, Leviticus 11 is answered where it says, and his meat was locusts and wild honey. And locust is a clean animal he can go ahead and eat. And you see the whole dietary program in Leviticus chapter 11. So John the Baptist is trying to obey. And of course, ceremonial water baptism is another part of Leviticus 8, verse 6. This is all Leviticus. This is all Deuteronomy. This is all Numbers. This is all Exodus. This is all the law that John the Baptist comes projecting forth. And when people say, I'm a Baptist, people say, really? Well, what's he doing? All he's doing is projecting all these laws. And he couldn't keep them all as much as he tried to, and this is what it looked like. When he tried, you don't see our society doing enough of this. But nonetheless, as we bring it back to where we are, I was getting off on a tangent, you kind of get the answers to John the Baptist as we study the law and we study these other points of law. Some of the answers start filling in when you start reading Matthew, Luke, and John. When you start reading some of these other books, they start kind of filling in because you're seeing the reference or the standard for the dispensation of law. It's all these laws. So we see this here in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 19. You shall keep my statute. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with a mingled seed. Neither shall a garment mingled of linen and wool come upon it. So we see that there's not to crossbreed cattle of different species. That's just the first part dealing with animals. So that was a little bit there, but in Exodus chapter 22, verse 1, that's our next one you want to take a look at. Still dealing with the issues of animals. How did Old Testament Israel deal with it? How is this going to be written into the law of the little flock of Israel in their New Testament? And it says here that if a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. So in dealing with this, you're seeing that if someone goes and steals an ox or a sheep and then kills it and sells it, steals it from somebody, in the end, you're going to restore, as it says there, 5 oxen for 1 ox and 4 sheep for 1 sheep. That's the law. That's how the law is written. God's law is written is that it's going to be just if you went and stole it, or the payback is 4-fold or sometimes 5-fold. And so it's this understanding that stealing and taking wrongfully, there's payback for that. Sin is not a right thing. Sin is not. There is payback for that. And so we see that there. If we look at 2 Samuel 12, you'll see where this concept plays out. 2 Samuel 12 with David. And a parable, not say a parable, but a lesson gets taught to King David by his prophet. And you'll be interested to see how King David responds in anger to the lesson that gets taught to him. And we see it here because he's remembering what the law says in in Exodus. He's remembering from Exodus. It says, and the Lord sent Nathan unto David, and he came unto him and said unto him, there were 2 men in one city, the one rich and the one poor. The rich man had exceeding many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing saving 1 little ewe lamb, which he had brought and nourished up, and it grew together with him and with his children. It did eat of his own meat and drank of his own cup, and lay in his bosom, and was unto him as a daughter. And there came a traveler unto the rich man, and he spared to take of his own flock and of his own herd, and to dress for the faring man that was come unto him, but took the poor man's lamb and dressed it for the man that was come unto him. So we're seeing a lesson taught to David. This is right after he took Uriah the Hittite's wife from him and made his wife, David made Uriah's wife his wife. And so that story or that lesson makes King David angry. So verse 5 is what we see here. He says, and David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. And he said to Nathan, as the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this thing shall surely die, and he shall restore the lamb 4-fold. So he knows what the law says about when someone steals unjustly a lamb, as we just read, our sheep, that things need to be restored 5-fold, 4-fold. That's what the law says. So he's making sure that law gets instituted. That law gets blasted, gets put on full blast in this scenario that gets explained to him. Just because it says, and he shall restore the lamb 4-fold, because he did this thing, because he had no pity. And of course, Nathan looks at him and says, and Nathan said to David, Thou art the, you're the one. When you had Uriah the Hittite killed, sorry, Frank, did I get that right? Yeah, Uriah the Hittite. When you had Uriah the Hittite killed and his wife, you're the rich man that took from the poor man. You're the one who has to restore fourfold. And this is all coming from Exodus chapter 22, verse 1. If a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. The concept, just a lesson of these things. You see it kind of play out. These laws, these commandments, that the concepts are residualing in their minds that, if something is taken unjustly, then fourfold, someone's going to pay it back. But Nathan the prophet says, well, you're the guy, King David, that's going to have to pay it back. And you're the one that's going to pay it back fourfold, as the law would say, as Exodus 22, verse 1 says, essentially. So it's interesting to see that that's the law. That's concerning animals. So far, we're seeing not to crossbreed cattle of different species. Another one says, thou shalt restore 5-fold for every stolen oxen and 4-fold for every stolen sheep. Just interesting to see that and how it plays out even into King David's time as God's timeline progresses. Just interesting to see this. I'm going back to Leviticus again, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 19. We saw the first part of that chapter being a commandment. Leviticus 19, verse 19, the first part of that verse, I should say, being one commandment, which was, ye shall keep my statutes, thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. We looked at that. We saw that as the first thing we saw today. The second part says, thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed. So again, you're not to even sow your field with mingled seed. So again, if you're planting a garden or whatever it is, you're not to sow mingled seed. You're not to do so. You're not to mingle the seed and grow different things, at least in the same field, apparently. Thy field, thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed. So we see that part there. As we see it there, again, Leviticus 19:19, the cross-reference I used was the same one we looked at already, which was Deuteronomy 22, verses 9 through 11. So it would be the same cross-reference because it's essentially mentioning the same thing. But we are seeing that you're not to let your cattle gender with diverse, with a diverse kind. And when it comes to sowing thy field, you don't do that with mingled seed. Again, 2 laws written in one verse. So we're seeing this, laid out here when you're dealing with, agriculture in this case. Not just animals, but we're seeing the agriculture part of it kick in as well. So even when you're dealing with certain seed, going towards fruit and plants and gardens and everything else, it has to be dealt with according to the law. So we see this working in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 19. Now, Leviticus 19, verse 23, about 4 verses down. Here's something you can ask somebody. Again, if you're evangelizing to somebody, you're trying to reach out to somebody and say, well, do you keep the commandments? Oh, I keep all the commandments. Really? Well, then have you kept this one? And here's what it pretty much says here is you're not to eat the fruit of a tree for 3 years from the time it was planted. So you can essentially ask them, have you had any fruits or vegetables lately? And someone will most likely say yes. And you can ask them, well, are you absolutely positive that it's been 3 years since that fruit or vegetable was planted in the ground? And you've waited 3 years for that fruit or vegetable to grow. And then you ate it. And then after they say, well, what are you talking about? You can say, well, work with me on this one. Just roll with me on this and I'll explain it in a minute. And then they'll say, well, I don't know. I have no idea. You say, well, then you don't know if you've broken laws or not. You have no idea if you've broken the law or not, because Leviticus chapter 19, verse 23 says, and when ye shall come into the land and shall have planted all manner of trees for food, then ye shall count the fruit thereof as uncircumcised. 3 years shall it be as uncircumcised unto you. It shall not be eaten of. Of course, verse 24 goes on, but in the 4th year, all the fruit thereof shall be holy to praise the Lord withal, and in the 5th year ye shall eat the fruit thereof. So you can kind of angle it as the verses talk about. You may not be able to eat this up until the 5th year, but at least 3 years. At least 3 years you can't eat the fruits and vegetables from the time it was planted. if you're a law keeper, if you're a commandment keeper, if you're truly obeying all the laws of God. And that's very easy to ask. It's not only thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. Have you eaten everything you've eaten when it comes to fruits and vegetables? Was it 3 years? Has it been 3 years since the time it was planted in the ground? That's a law. That's a commandment. Dealing with agriculture and animals. That's Leviticus 19, verse 23. So we see this here. And so this is the first part we're seeing here. And then we'll see some parts where it plays out, not to eat the fruit of the tree for 3 years. If we look at, let's see if a good one, Deuteronomy 14, verse 28. As we go there, Deuteronomy 14, verse 28, still sticking with the same law, the same commandment. You see it kind of play out, the concept of the 3-year concept. As even here in Deuteronomy 14, verse 28, says that at the end of 3 years, thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of thine increase the same year, and shalt lay it up within thy gates. And the Levite, because he hath no part nor inheritance with thee, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, with their gates, shall come and shall eat and be satisfied, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of thine hand which thou doest. So again, you're seeing something in about 3 years that they come and they eat. In this case, for the Levite, food is provided 3 years after. So different laws are saying it's okay for these guys to eat 3 years after the fact, but it's 3 years after there's fruits and so on and so forth. Just the concept, the idea that you got to wait 3 years for this thing can be done. So we see a good reference there. Even if we look at Numbers 18, verse 12. In Numbers chapter 18, verse 12, it's still dealing with, we can get there as well. Numbers 18, verse 12. A 3-year concept. Here. And we just see here, it just says, all the best of the oil, and all the best of the wine, and the wheat, and the first fruits of them, which they shall offer unto the Lord, them have I given thee. And whatsoever is first ripe in the land, which they shall bring unto the Lord, shall be thine. Every one that is clean in thine house shall eat of it. So again, just to add to the agriculture part of it, whenever one was to sacrifice, even after waiting 3 years, you had to offer the best of the best to the Lord. So even then, you could add this detail into the fact that even after waiting 3 years, the Jew had to go and offer the best of the best of the best of their fruit and their foods to the Lord in the temple. And so you're seeing that this is the best of the oil, the best of the wine, the wheat, and the first fruits, all these things. After waiting 3 years, the best of the best had to be offered on top of it. So again, when they say everyone's obeying or I'm obeying all the 613 commandments, take a look at this. It's very fascinating, very, very intricate, very wise, very amazing. But can we be honest? Not everyone right here, right now, but everybody be honest, in which we're engaging in conversation with and say, are you truly keeping all these 613 commandments, especially agriculture, animals, friendship, citizenship, brotherhood, business practices, and so on. So that's just looking at that. But so we're looking at this and we see just the first couple of them there. And we're just looking at that and we're seeing already it's getting pretty deep and pretty intricate. And that's just the first 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 14 that we're taking a look at. But then there's more. And then we go to Leviticus 19:24, which I believe we were just at. We were reading about the 3-year concept, but it's more zooming in on that 4th year. But in the 4th year, all the fruit thereof shall be holy to praise the Lord withal. And it's just talking about there that says that in the fruit of fruit-bearing trees in the 4th year of the planting shall be sacred like the second tithe, and eaten in Jerusalem. And that's what we're seeing here, is that when the 4th year whatever fruit that is grown, or whatever fruit that's there, whatever fruit bearing seeds are there, they're to be holy unto the Lord. So you can say, whatever fruit that was eaten, or I'm sorry, whatever fruit that was grown that you didn't eat for 3 years, in that 4th year, did you dedicate it and make it holy unto the Lord? Again, that's something that most likely I would say 99.9% of everyone's going to say, well, no, I don't do that. And so, well, then you're breaking the laws, because this is what the law says. The law says every time you eat fruits and vegetables, you have to wait 3 years from the time it was planted in the ground. You have to know when that was. And then in the 4th year, you dedicate those fruits and so forth, seeds and vegetables, to the Lord, and you eat them in the 5th year. And so every year should have produced an abundance of crops where you can eat, but you have to know and time it. That context. So we see that there. And then as we continue, what we see as we continue, we're going to see in, let's see, the book of Haggai has a lot to say. So that's a book we don't really go to too much, but we're going to go there today, because as we see in previous verses, in previous studies, it was the Old Testament prophets that really called out Israel when they started to disobey the law. They were the ones who stood up and said, Israel, you're really some lawbreakers here, and we're here to call you out on that. So it's going to be the book of Haggai we're going to go to now. And it's going to be chapter 1, verse 4. It's not a book we regularly visit, but it's a good point to we'll make it a point to visit it. And get there as well. This is the book of Haggai, chapter 1, verse 4. Right here. And what we read here, again, it's going to be dealing with fruits and seeds and everything else. We see there it says, is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? Now therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. He says in Syria, ye have sown much and bring in little. Ye eat, but ye have not enough. Ye drink, but ye are not filled with drink. Ye clothe you, but there is none warm. And he that earneth wages to put it into a bag with holes. Again, this is dealing with what we looked at for the past 2 weeks concerning those 5 courses of judgment, where they would eat and drink and dress themselves, but they would never be content. They would never be, their enemies would chase after them. Haggai is bringing that point up to unrepentant, unbelieving Israel, saying that, you can eat. You've eaten, you've sown much, but you bring in little. You earn much, but you put it into a bag of holes, essentially. And so you're seeing a little bit about eating and drinking and sowing. This is what they're reaping and sowing, comes to their crops and everything else. But it continues on. If we look at verses 9 through 11 in chapter 1, it says, for ye looked for much, and lo, it came to little. And when ye brought it home, I did blow upon it. Why, saith the Lord of hosts? Because of mine house that is waste, and ye run every man unto his own house. Therefore the heaven over you is stayed from dew, and the earth is stayed from her fruit. And I called for a drought upon the land, and upon the mountains, and upon the corn, and upon the new wine, and upon the oil, and upon that which the ground bringeth forth, and upon men, and upon cattle, and upon all the labor of the hands. In dealing with the courses of judgment, the Lord is saying that he's essentially cursed, not blessed, Israel, and he's cursed, not blessed, the wine and the corn and the oil and the cattle and the ground. He's done all this throughout these courses, those 5 courses of judgments we were talking about for the past 2 weeks towards the end of the study. But Haggai is the prophet who brings this up to make it a point. He's the Lord's spokesman, and he's saying there are laws dealing with corn and agriculture and wine and everything else. Israel, you're disobeying all the laws, so you're getting all the curses. And this is what you see in Haggai as this kind of comes up through there. But then it continues on in Haggai chapter 2, verse 18. It says, consider now from this day and upward, from the 24th day, from the 9th month, even from the day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid. Consider it. Is the seed yet in the barn? Yea, as yet the vine and the fig tree and the pomegranate and the olive tree hath not brought forth, from this day will I bless you. So he goes forth and he's talking about how he's going to end up, blessing them. In the end, he's going to end up blessing Israel. But he has to go and use this as the example that, as these fruits haven't gone forth, and he talks about the pomegranate and the olive tree, had not brought forth. He's from this day, he's gonna bless them. And he's talking to Zerubbabel and all those that have come out of the Babylonian captivity. But nonetheless, this is the audience to whom Haggai speaks to, Israel out of the captivity, and nonetheless warning them, so all these things that have happened prior to, and not to go back into it, and nonetheless that while they were a rebellious nation, he will work on the blessings if they continue in a good covenant standing. So we read this here, and it's an interesting book as we see it there, Haggai and everything else. But now we'll go into the next law, and this next law is pretty interesting. Again, we're still dealing with agriculture and animals, and we're seeing quite a bit with agriculture and animals, and this is one in Deuteronomy chapter 22 in verse 6. And we were mentioning this just a little bit earlier. Deuteronomy 22 verse 6. In this case, we're dealing with the animals. It says, if a bird's nest chance to be before thee in the way, in any tree or on the ground, whether they be young ones or eggs, and the dam sitting upon the young or upon the eggs, thou shalt not take the dam with the young, but thou shalt in any wise let the dam go, and take the young to thee, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest prolong thy days. So verse 6 and 7 of Deuteronomy 22, essentially, and they're saying dam as in, mother bird type of thing. They're synonymous with, mother bird, that type of thing. If a bird's nest chance to be before thee in the way, in any tree or ground, and whatever it is, thou shalt not take, you're not going to pick up the mother bird. You're not going to pick up the birds. You see, if you walk across the nest, don't touch it. Leave the mother alone, leave the eggs alone, leave the birds alone. And as a result, in verse 7, it says, that it may be well with thee, number one, and that thou mayest prolong thy days. So you're actually, as a result of having covenant standing with God under law in prophecy, that's not us, you're going to prolong your life by leaving the birds in the nest. Don't touch a nest. If you don't touch a bird's nest, you're going to prolong your life. Today, in the dispensation of grace, living in a present evil world, this is not going to work. You either prolong your life through other means, or you don't. You're not going to prolong your life through means of a bird's nest. But Israel could. And we know this, we were talking about this earlier, because we also study other laws and rules about running your hands through washing water. We see this through Levitical ceremonial washings. And we were talking about the points of it being that just for having right standing and obedience to God, you'd prolong your days. But it's also good health to, wash from bacteria, wash from disease, stay away from disease and everything. That also helps prolong your days. Same with the concept with these birds. It may be that, the bird may have some sort of disease, whatever. That's one possible idea. And therefore you prolong your days a little bit, but you're also in that good covenant standing with God because this is his law and you're obeying his laws in the dispensation of law. And again, that's another thing, which today we're not. But Israel was. And so we learn from this. And we see these are concerning laws dealing with animals and birds and everything else. And agriculture, we're seeing whether it be dealing with diverse kinds of seeds and plants and corn and wine and everything else, or dealing with birds and cattle and oxen and ass and everything else, we're seeing how the laws are. And if we think of it, this is how Israel's to be in their kingdom. At some point in the millennial kingdom, this is how they'll be dealing with things, businesses and as a result, and citizens, fellow citizens, and birds and oxen and ass wine and seed and plants and everything else. We're kind of seeing the laws that'll be written in their hearts and how they're supposed to be dealing with all this. So we see this here, and that's in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 6 and 7. So we see this here, and that's, let me find the verse there. For example, if we look at something that I found, two verses that might help explain things a little bit better, at least some good spiritual lessons to add to some spiritual lessons. If we look at Genesis chapter 8, verse 17. Again, just some spiritual lessons adding to spiritual lessons. The reasons why that law might have been written, in which the Jew is not to touch a bird, a mother bird, or any bird, or eggs from the nest. We see in Genesis chapter 8, verse 17, it says, "Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply upon the earth." So just the spiritual lesson, the concept, is that they would breed abundantly in the earth and be fruitful and multiply upon the earth. For the Jew, they don't touch that nest. They don't touch the mother bird. They don't touch the baby bird. They don't touch the eggs. They don't touch anything. They would continue to be fruitful and multiply. That's just a possible idea. That would be something where, the humans stay out of the way, and they would continue to just be fruitful and multiply and do what needs to be done. Now, this is not what Genesis 8 is talking about. This is Noah and the ark and everything else. But the concept, the spiritual lesson that this is what could be. This could be what occurs, or as a result of leaving nature alone, let them do their thing. They would be fruitful, multiply, and do what needs to be done. So this is a possibility. And again, if this sounds ludicrous, I'd say go ahead. No, I wouldn't worry about it. If it's something that could fit into the understanding of why the law is there, then that might be a good thing to put in study notes and continue with it. A good cross-reference as well, another one that I wrote down as well, would be also Leviticus chapter 22, verse 28. In Leviticus 22, verse 28, dealing with the bird's nest concept. Go there. Leviticus 22, 28. It says, "And whether it be a cow or ewe, you shall not kill it and her young both in one day." That's a law. Something that I didn't, that we go over verbatim, but this is something we can associate with this, where you're not going to go and kill they don't want, there's a law saying God does not want, whether it be a cow or ewe, you're not going to kill the mother and the young both in one day. That's just something that the law says it's not to be done. So in dealing with the nest, the mother, the eggs, so on and so forth, you're not to go around essentially messing with it, killing it. Don't do these. Leave it alone. Let things go, and as a result, as we see, but they may be well with thee, and thou mayest prolong thy life. Just some possible ideas, and they may be fruitful and multiply. They do their thing, and you go and you do your thing, and you both reap rewards as a result, or you, as far as it's well with you, and you prolong your life as a result. You also see about that in, I believe, in Exodus. Again, not talking about the bird's nest, but you see this is why they're taught to honor thy mother and father, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long in the earth. That phrase comes up a couple times. And again, you read that even when they're, I believe it's in Ephesians or one of the Apostle Paul's epistles, not that there's any covenant standing, but the Apostle Paul talks about that we're still in a dispensation of grace to honor our mothers and honor our fathers, and the grace standing we're to have with certain people and this dispensation of grace. He talks about, even the law says in Exodus, honor thy mother and father, and he says, which is the first commandment with promise. And so it talks about that, and the promise was that you would live long on the earth. And that doesn't kick in because we don't have covenant standing, but he's stating a fact. He's stating that's the first commandment. When you go through the law, that gives the promise of long life for Israel. So it is something that we can learn from as he states it in his epistles. But it's not something where we're going to have long life if we obey or if we show honor to father and mother, and if we avoid birds' nests and everything else, obeying the law is not going to give us long life. It can give us a great amount of help by learning and taking the spiritual lessons and understanding what it has to say, but it's not going to save us. It's, in fact, going to give us the knowledge of sin as a result. But again, we learn from it and properly understand it, rightly divide it, we're going to do just fine. So we see this here in Deuteronomy 6. That's kind of the fifth one we're looking at, as I understand it. That was actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, the sixth one. I'm sorry. That was our sixth one we're looking at. And we'll go into number 7, going back to actually a couple verses down in verse 9. And it's more the same thing we're seeing from before. We're said not to eat the produce of diverse seeds sown in a vineyard. And this is something we saw a little bit earlier. It's just teaching the details of the same law we saw earlier, just a little bit different. And that's where it says, thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with diverse seeds, lest the fruit of thy seed, which thou hast sown, and the fruit of thy vineyard be defiled. Again, more about diverse seeds in the fields. But this one says, thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with diverse seeds, lest the fruit of the seed which thou hast sown and the fruit of the field be defiled. So again, more information about the same things we were seeing earlier dealing with agriculture, not to mix diverse types of seed. So we see that there. And then the cross-reference for this was Leviticus 19:19. We were there earlier, but I just wanted to make the point that this does come up again. And that's in Deuteronomy 22:9. If we look at the next one, Deuteronomy 22:10, just the next verse, it says, thou shalt not plow with an ox and an ass together. Again, now, when you read this, of course, if you were to say, I'm keeping the laws, I obey all the laws of Jesus, I keep all the commandments of Jesus, we don't even have, there might be some farmers out there, but not too many Americans have in their house, in their backyard, an ox and ass that they would need to beware or watch out for, that they don't plow together. So this, in context, most people wouldn't have to worry about in the first place. And again, there could be farmers out there where they need to do this, but again, thou shalt not plow with an ox and an ass together. That's a law. That's a rule. So we see this here in Deuteronomy 22:10. Mentions this over here. And then not to work with beasts of different species. And it's just the concept of things being unequally yoked, not working together. Paul mentions this. And if we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, this is where Paul even adds this concept of not being unequally yoked into his own epistles, as he teaches us. And this is 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. And Paul actually takes the law in some of his epistles, and he puts it in there to teach a point. Whatever the point is, whether he's trying to make a point about grace, he'll actually use the law to do it. Those spiritual lessons that come out of the law, Paul's going to teach them. And so we see there in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 14, he says, be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God, as God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore, come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. And so this is what's written in, say, Leviticus 26, or what we're reading in Deuteronomy 22. But the point of not being, or the unequal yoke, we're seeing this all the way in Deuteronomy 22. These concepts, all the way dealing with agriculture and animals, this unequal, things that are unequally yoked. Even Paul mentions this as part of his lessons and information, grace commandments, as you want to call it, to the Corinthians, and to the Romans, the Ephesians, Galatians, everything else. He makes it a point to say to them. Now, the commandments of grace are extremely different because they're leading towards a whole different dispensation and a point of seeing souls saved and seeing saints edified. Dispensation of law, when we are in Deuteronomy and Leviticus and looking at all this, is about building up a righteous nation of a kingdom of priests. That's the end point of trying to obey 613 points of laws. You're trying to build up a righteous nation who will be a kingdom of priests. That's not America. That's not any nation today. That's not China. That's not anything. That's not us as, that's not our enemies concerning America. That's not our friends in America. That's nobody. Nobody today is going to be that kingdom of priests today. So these laws don't apply to anyone. But the Pauline commandments of grace apply to everyone, not the laws. So we see this here, and we read this in Deuteronomy 22, verse 10. Then as we go to Deuteronomy 25, verse 4. Deuteronomy 25, 4. Here. Real quick, we get here. Make sure I got what I'm looking for. Yep, there we go. Deuteronomy 25, 4 goes on to read that thou shalt not muzzle the ox when he treadeth out the corn. So he makes this a point to say here, and Paul will also mention this as well. We see it in 1 Timothy 5, 18. We also see it in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 9. And I'll just read that real quick. It says, for it is written in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God take care for oxen? So Paul mentions this again to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 9, just as we read more about the law in 2 Corinthians. And so concepts from the law get plugged in that's all Paul had before God saved him, was he had all the law. So he had all those lessons and principles and instructions and understandings that the law gave. And so when he is teaching concepts and information about the dispensation of grace, preaching Christ according to the revelation of the mystery, information about the dispensation of grace, he had the law as his backup. He had the law as his springboard, or as his principle, as his piece of information that would help him teach this. And then he'd say, for it's written in the law of Moses. It's there in the law that thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. He would say I these things as a man, or saith the law the same also? Paul saying, am I just making this up, or is it even written in, did God even say this stuff in the law? And so you go back and say this, but we see in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 4, thou shalt not muzzle the ox when he treadeth out the corn. So we see this here. We look at Proverbs chapter 12, verse 10. And in Proverbs chapter 12, verse 10, concerning this law, we see why it's there. An interesting cross-reference there. Not muzzling the ox as the corn is available to him, as he's plowing, as he's treading out the corn. You don't want to keep him from it. You want to have it available to him. Proverbs 12:10 says, a righteous man regardeth the life of his beast, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. So even when the tender mercies of the wicked are out there, it's still cruel. But when it comes to the concept of, say, allowing the ox to eat the corn that he's out there trowing and flooding and everything else, treadeth out the corn, that's a law from Deuteronomy that you're not to keep back the corn, and you're not to muzzle the ox as the corn's out there. Let him eat, when he can from it. So, and that's a law. That's not a good idea. That's not wishful thinking. That's not being nice. That's the law. And if you break the law, you're a lawbreaker. You're criminals. By the law is the knowledge of sin if you don't do this. So this is what we read, here, concerning Old Testament Israel and the little flock, what they'll have to do. So see that there, and then of course Hosea brings this up again. If you look at Hosea chapter 10, verse 11, this comes up even with Hosea. Hosea chapter 10 and verse 11. There. Let's see, Hosea, there we go. Hosea chapter 10, verse 11. It says, and Ephraim is as an heifer that is taught, and loveth to tread out the corn. But I passed over upon her fair neck. I will make Ephraim to ride, Judah shall plow, and Jacob shall break his clods. Sow to yourselves in righteousness, reap in mercy. Rake up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord till he come and rain righteousness upon you. Ye have plowed wickedness, ye have reaped iniquity, ye have eaten the fruits of lies, because thou didst trust in thy way, in the multitude of thy mighty men. Therefore shall a tumult arise among thy people, and all thy fortresses shall be spoiled, as Shalman spoiled Bethalbo in the day of battle. The mother was dashed in pieces upon her children. So shall Bethel do unto you because of your great wickedness. In the morning shall the king of Israel utterly be cut off. But you're seeing him talking concerning agriculture and cattle and animals and so forth. He's talking about how if they've sown anything concerning agriculture, they've sown to themselves, they've plowed wickedness and they're going to reap iniquity as a result of plowing wickedness. Instead, he's saying, sow to yourselves in righteousness and reap in mercy, is what Hosea is talking about. When it comes to the idea of plowing and sowing and agriculture and reaping, that type of concept. So we're seeing this here, concerning the idea of Deuteronomy 25:4, I'm sorry. So, and again, when this comes to looking at more, we're going to see another law that comes up, and we were in Leviticus 19:9 earlier, but it's not to reap the entire field. If you look there, that's again Leviticus 19:9. Go back to that for a minute. We're going to see some famous people show up in just a minute. We're going to see why this law exists. Leviticus 19, verse 9, dealing with agriculture again. We've read this verse before. It brings up a lot of different laws and commandments. And when ye reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. Now, when we see this, in Leviticus 19, verse 9, I believe it's going to be in Leviticus 23:22, where it comes up one more time. Leviticus 23:22. And it's talking about just leaving a little bit of the corners on your field. And it's there for a reason. And we're going to see, again, famous verses and famous people that do this and profit from this. We'll see this in just a minute. Again, the law, the commandment, the rules, the lay of the land, the law of the land says, and when ye reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not make clean riddance of the corners of thy field. When thou reapest, thou shalt not gather any gleanings of thy harvest. Thou shalt leave them unto the poor, and to the stranger. I am the Lord your God. So when they go there and they pick up their corn or their fruit or whatever their agriculture is, they're on purpose supposed to leave a little bit off to the side. And that's for any poor that are out there that need to eat something. If they need to, eat some corn or grab some corn or take some corn, when they harvest and they reap in, say, 90%, 95%, 80%, they need to leave the corners of their field out for the poor, so the poor can go and eat some, or the stranger into Israel can eat some. So where would we see this come up before? Whether you see people, reaping the land and leaving some out, or eating the corn that's left out for them. Well, we'll see some verses now. If you look at the book of Ruth, chapter 2, verse 2. We're seeing why these things happen, and it's all done because there are laws in place that are being carried out. Joshua judges Ruth. Ruth chapter 2, verse 2. This will kick in when you read the book of Ruth more, because all these laws are being carried out accordingly. It says, Ruth 2:2 says, and Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, go, my daughter. So you're seeing now that the reason why Ruth goes out into the field and gleans ears of corn after him, Boaz and everything else. She's going out there, well, one, because there were laws regarding this. There was Leviticus 23, Leviticus 23, Leviticus 9, that they were to go out there and glean in the first place. But when you get to Ruth chapter 2, verse 15, it says, and when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. And let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. So if she does something wrong when she is gleaning the harvest or the corn or whatever, just let her do her thing. Let her learn how to do it. Don't rebuke her. She's learning. She's doing what she can. But she's trying to obey Leviticus 19:9. She's trying to obey Leviticus 23:22 by gleaning what the law said to do. Interestingly enough, if we go to Luke chapter 6, verse 1, this is where you leave some of the crops out. Who's going to come along and eat it? Luke chapter 6, verse 1. There's going to be some people that come along and they're going to see that 5%, 10%, or whatever percent that's left over in the field, and they're going to start eating what's in the field based on, again, Leviticus 19:9 and Leviticus 23:22. And a lot of times you've read, no matter how many times you've read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you may have glossed right over this and never associated this with Leviticus 23, Leviticus 19. And we see here it says, Luke chapter 6, verse 1, and it came to pass on the second Sabbath after the first, that he went through the cornfields, and his disciples plucked the ears of corn and did eat, rubbing them in their hands. Why did they do that? Well, because that's what was left for them in Leviticus 19:9, Leviticus 23:22. People were obeying the law, leaving some for people. In this case, it talks about the strangers. It talks about the strangers. It talks about the poor. It talks about others. But we see there, they come along and they take what they can. Because they left everything to follow the Lord. And you see there, when they walk through the cornfields, the Lord knows this is where the food's at. And, aside from him, he's able to bring up, bread, loaves, and fishes in the first place. But nonetheless, here's people that have corn available. In this case, they pluck the ears of corn and they eat them. And nonetheless, Leviticus 19:9 and Leviticus 23:22 shows why they did this. So we see this there. But as it continues on from Leviticus 19:9, going into the next rule or the next commandment, the next law, is to leave the unreaped corners of the field or orchard for the poor. And we kind of saw that a moment ago, not just to reap the entire field, that's what we just went over, but also to leave some for the poor. Don't just reap the entire field, that's part one, but the purpose of it is to leave some for the poor. And that's Leviticus 19:9. Again, we're going to leave the same cross references where we say Ruth 2, chapter 2, Ruth 2, chapter 5. Matthew 12 is pretty much the same as Luke chapter 6, so we'll leave that there. And I think we're going to do the same when we look at the next one. The next commandment says not to gather the gleanings. The gleanings is pretty much the ears that have fallen to the ground while you reap. If they fall to the ground, just leave them on the ground. Let someone else have them. And that's again Leviticus 19:9, which goes with Leviticus or Deuteronomy. I think it was 26, 23. But again, Ruth 2 shows this. Ruth 2:15 also shows the example of this. And the next one on our list, on our outline, to leave gleanings for the poor. We kind of just saw that, but again, it mentions it, Leviticus 19:9, same cross-reference. I would use again, Ruth chapter 2, verse 2 and verse 15. But then Leviticus 19:10, and we're going to stop with the commandments, is not to gather the imperfect clusters of the vineyard. Leviticus 19, verse 10. And so when we look at all these different things, dealing with agriculture, dealing with animals, you're seeing that how a kingdom of priests is supposed to be dealing with their food, with their agriculture, with their fruit, with their corn, with their wine, with their substance, with their cattle. And Leviticus 19:10 says, "And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God." So even when they have a vineyard, they're not to gather every grape of the vineyard. So when it comes to not just corn, but also vineyards, grapes and grapes and grapes within the vineyard, not to gather every grape, but leave that for the poor. So there's an abundance of possibility where the poor could go into a vineyard and eat grapes or corn or whatever it was that was available to them. You could at least have some sort of food in Israel. So we see that there. And it was a law that all these things be left. If you walked into a cornfield and there was nothing available, they were law breaking. They were breaking law. They were criminals. They were breaking God's law. So we see that through Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, Exodus. These were laws of agriculture, laws of animals. So when you look at everything, whether it's restoring fivefold for every stolen oxen or fourfold for every stolen sheep, you saw dealing with King David. So we're looking at oxen, sheep, seed, fruit, bird's nest, cattle, produce of diverse seeds, vineyards, not to be unequally yoked, whether it be with seeds, fruits, cattle, flocks, herds, things like this, not to muzzle the ox when he treadeth out the corn, not to reap the entire field of your fruit, corn, so on and so forth, and leave gleanings for the poor in your fields. We're seeing that there's all these different principles and concepts that we can learn from here in the dispensation of grace, and we can apply it however it works for us in our different situations. But nonetheless, these were the laws that dealt with this. We can think of many people who break these laws, but again, these are not laws that we are under today. We're not under any of these laws, but we can learn so much from them, because whatsoever was written aforetime was written for our learning. We know this from Romans, that Romans teaches, Paul teaches this. And so we have a little, maybe a short moment here to go over this. We taught last time the 5 courses of judgment. This here on the outline, we have here, well, when Israel breaks the laws, they have to commit an offering. And so the types of offerings they could have done, as we just have on our outline here, is that there were burnt offerings, grain offerings, or meal and drink offerings, as they're also called, peace offerings, sin offerings, and guilt offerings. And this came all the way from Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel all the way down to Israel. And it could be, the offerings could have been a bull or a ram or a he-goat, turtle doves, pigeons, grain, and a whole lot more than that. They could have been public. They could have been offered in public. They could have been, at the temple, at the tabernacle. They could have been offered privately, and they could have been offered seasonally during feasts, the different feasts that Israel had. But we see there, burnt offerings are in Leviticus 1, where it talks about offering, male without blemish, cattle, also flocks or sheep or goats, a male without blemish, or fowls, turtle doves, or young pigeons. There's this basic, atonement that would pay for sins temporarily. It's like writing a check. If you're paying for your rent, this is just the example. It pays for about a month, pays for whatever short period of time, but then next month, you got to pay it again. This is the essential purpose of the burnt offering, is that I'll pay for my sins for the month of August, but then I got to find another bull because I got some sins coming up in September. Is essentially how Israel, roughly, would go about this. They would have to offer a burnt offering. If they didn't leave gleanings for the poor, if they didn't love their brother as themselves, if they didn't have good business practices, if they didn't obey all 613 points of law, they would have to, offer a burnt offering. In Leviticus chapter 1, you find it. Leviticus 2, chapter 2 talks about the grain offering or the meal offering. And so you find that in there, talking about this is what shows honor to God. And you can see this also in Leviticus chapter 2, verses 1 through 16, Numbers 15, 1 through 24, and Exodus 29, 38 through 44. I've got the chart in our outline. This is why I'm just reading through it real quick. Our time's a little short, but I do just wanted to go through it. It's the last time we did the 5 courses of judgment, so we're going through a little bit extra just to give the benefit of what Israel had to do when they started breaking these laws. So they would often have, and these were essentially laws too. They had to do these offerings when these laws were broken. So you had a burnt offering, you have a grain and a meal offering. That's Leviticus chapter 1, Leviticus chapter 2. Leviticus chapter 3 was a peace offering where that expressed gratitude to God. There's the peace offering. You had three types of peace offerings. You had a Thanksgiving offering, you had a vow, and you had a voluntary offering. And so those were three types of peace offerings you saw there. In Leviticus chapter 4, you have a sin offering that makes payment for sins that are committed in ignorance. And as you went through there, you'd see there would be pretty much four types of sin offerings, and you'd have one offering for the priest of Israel, a sin offering for the congregation, a sin offering for the ruler of the tribe or the area, and a sin offering for the common people. So you had four types of sin offerings, and that's in Leviticus 4. Leviticus 5 is the guilt offering that makes payments for sins against God and others. And that would be in Leviticus, not only in Leviticus 5, but also in Leviticus 16. You can read more about that as well. So I didn't want to spend too much time in that, talking about the different offerings and so forth, but I didn't want to not spend any time in it. So we see that there's laws even for sacrifices and sin offerings. And so when we read things like that, you see that, well, are you obeying all 613 points of law? Everyone who doesn't know better would say yes. Say, well, if you commit a sin, are you committing the right sacrifices when you do wrong? Are you offering the right bull, the right goat, the right lamb, the right he-goat when you do wrong today? Because this is what you're finding in Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 1, Leviticus chapter 2, Leviticus 3, Leviticus 4, 5, all the way to 16 and 17. There's certain bulls you have to offer. There's certain goats you have to offer. There's certain lambs and so forth when you fail to not eat your fruit and vegetables 3 years after they've been planted into the ground. So you start out saying that without somebody having actually studied the Bible, and they'll look at you like you're crazy. But having gone through the system of sacraments with rules and the laws that we find with agriculture and animals, we find that it does make sense for those who are under law, and that's not us. So with that, we'll stop here. We'll get into the next one next time, and we'll lean towards kind of wrapping it up, whether it's the next study or 2 studies from now. But we'll stop here, see if there's any questions or thoughts on this, and we're going to go from there.
John, how do the different denominations reconcile all of this information in case somebody is reading their Bible and they say, well, look, I'm not offering a beast. How do they try to explain that away or reconcile?
Well, it's just funny just to hear that question. It just sounds funny that
yeah, it does.
Like what if someone's actually reading their Bible? What do they do? It's funny to hear that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was in the church 20 years ago here in Florida, back when I first started working at the airport. And the pastor, don't know if he was saved or what, he said he goes, I'm really into the book of, I forget, Leviticus or Deuteronomy or whatever. He goes, there's so many laws that Christians have to obey today. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to teach it.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, I thought it was great. Okay. Teach what you got to teach, because whatever you're teaching, I want to learn it. But knowing you better, I didn't know what.
That's what I mean. You just can't reconcile this.
Yeah.
You just can't.
And yet these laws and rules were meant for reconciliation, were meant for Israel being reconciled back to God by doing a system of sacrifices and right actions and faith plus works and everything else.
Yeah, Peter would be all over you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments on anything? Agriculture and animals, laws, rules, commandments?
Yeah. I have a comment, or I guess a combination of comment question. Thinking back to myself before I started right dividing, if someone had tried to explain this to me, I would have said, no, I don't have to try to follow all those commandments, just the 10 commandments. So how would I would think that most people that don't read their Bible very closely would think all they have to follow is the 10 Commandments and they wouldn't sit still for much of a lesson on this kind of thing. How would you quickly make them understand that this is what they're referring to when they say you have to follow the commandments?
Well, what I would do is I would maybe bring them to maybe like the 8th commandment that talks about not bearing false witness against your neighbor, like loving your neighbor as yourself, and saying, well, by doing these, by leaving some corn in the field for the poor and for the stranger and for your and this is a quick summary or a quick attempt to parallel everything. They're saying by trying to leave the corn for the poor and the stranger and everything else, you're trying to love your neighbor as yourself. And then see what they say to that. Of course, they may reject that too, but it would be more so that, by leaving food for strangers, leaving food as someone who has a field full of crops and you bring in 80 for yourself or 70 or whatever you bring in, you leave some for the others. And then you can show them Luke chapter 6 with the disciples plucking the corn off of the, and eating it. You could show them, that they're essentially trying to love their neighbor as themselves, which is the 9th commandment, which is, that's a more popular commandment. That's more well known.
Yeah.
So, and that might help.
Yeah, okay. I'm trying to think because I think most people that if you would sit down with them and try to tell them they're under all these laws, they would disagree with you. They wouldn't want to listen to that. And they think their own version of the 10 Commandments, that they're doing it.
Yeah.
They're still doing that. They can't keep all 10.
Well, no,
10 as they think, so, they're still guilty.
Yeah.
But, it is difficult to kind of bring this in there and show them. But they do want all of the blessings that Israel can claim.
That's for sure.
So they're putting themselves under Israel's cafeteria style. They like that, but they don't like that.
Well, I would say that they could make the case that, well, I am right dividing. I'm not doing what Israel did, but I'm doing the 10 Commandments. I'm just trying to think of what I probably would have argued when I didn't know true right dividing.
What said to me was, first heard right division, but I was still sticking to my guns. Whatever church I was going to at the time was, this makes sense, and I really like where you're going with this, but I still do whatever X, Y, Z. And then someone asked me, well, did you offer a bull at church today? And I was like, no. I said, but then I knew what that was. I was like, but I see where you're going with this. You're right. I don't do that. Did you offer a goat at church today? And I said, no. And I said, well, people would say in other dispensations and other times, that's what had to be done. And so they made it a point to show the dispensational difference by saying, even the fact that you did not offer a bull or a goat at church today shows that there's a dispensational difference between one group and another.
That's a good explanation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, like I said, I was trying to argue with my old self. What would I say?
You can even tell somebody the fact that there's an Old Testament and a New Testament shows that there's different things going on in the Bible. There's an Old Testament, there's a New Testament. And we're not a part of either. You could even save that for another conversation later, but say the fact that there's an Old Testament and that there's a New Testament shows that God's doing something different in his timeline. And talking about how the Old Testament's for Israel, the New Testament's for Israel, we're not a part of either. We're not New Testament Christians. We're definitely not Old Testament Christians. But
yeah, I think that would blow their mind if I just came out with that.
Think there's any place in the Bible that actually shows you 10 commandments, does it?
I think Exodus 20 starts. Is that noise?
Well, what I mean is that, okay, guys, we're doing away with the 613 and we're narrowing it down to 10.
No. I think Exodus 20 reads off 10 commandments. Then I think Moses somebody says something for a paragraph or 2 or 3,
Exodus 20.
and then it just keeps going on with the commandments, but people stop there. Yeah, like Exodus 20, verse 11, and you said, this is the typical thing that you read, that you know about what are the 10 commandments. You see it in Exodus 20, 11 through through 17, and then it goes on in verse 18, and all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings. So now we're talking about thunderings and lightnings, but you see these first 10 that are mentioned. But then you got to keep reading on. You got to keep seeing all throughout the book of Exodus, and then into Leviticus, and then into Deuteronomy, and then into Numbers. And people, you'd be lucky if people read that.
After Numbers, there's no more laws that are given.
No, now you start to see that the laws are instituted, and Israel slowly starts breaking. By the time you get to Judges, they're already throwing away obedience to the law.
Yeah.
And so they start falling into the 5 courses of judgment. Then the prophets come up and they say, Israel, you're no good. You need to essentially repent, change your mind, and you need to start getting back on track with what you said you would obey. And all these different prophets start popping up and saying, you guys are, I'm not one of usury, you're one of usury. And those have to do with the law. And you guys, you're not going to get the blessings, the rain, because you're reaping and sowing iniquity instead of reaping and sowing stuff out of Leviticus 19, proper agriculture usage. And, your business practices are terrible. You're not loving your neighbor. You're murdering your neighbor because you're out there worshiping Baal. You're sacrificing your kids to false gods. So the prophets are rising up as God rises them up and tells them, go out and speak this to Israel. Go out and speak that. And then finally, when the 5th course of judgment comes, it says, tell them I'm just going to take you all away. And they even stand there and say, you're lying, Jeremiah. We're not going anywhere. And Jeremiah says, you are being all taken away. They're coming right now. In fact, he tells the believing remnant, just when they come, just surrender. If you want to live, just surrender. You'll be fine. You'll be absolutely fine if you surrender completely and wholly 100%. So if you want to fight them, you're going to lose the fight. But God will guarantee your safety if you just surrender. That was, again, Israel, their history, their heritage, their story. So
I think that this emphasizes the importance of reading through the Old Testament. I was just recently talking with another girlfriend when we went camping, and she was saying how hard it is for her to read through the Old Testament because she doesn't understand it. And I think, especially today, a lot of people just want to read the New Testament because it seems practical to their today. But like this, they don't understand all these commandments. They only think or remember the 10 commandments. And, it's hard for me to read through the Old Testament sometimes because there's so many details, like in the building of the temple, that I don't even understand. But quite often what I do is I turn on my Bible app on my phone and let them read it to me. Because for one thing, there's words that I'm stumbling over, names that I'm stumbling over. And to hear someone that puts the emphasis and the accent, and that's another way to get it into my brain as I follow it with my eyes. But it sort of keeps me focused on the passage, even though my mind wants to wander because I can't identify with, a lot of what is being said in some passages.
Yep. Same with the genealogy.
Yeah, same thing. It's very nice to have the app read it to me because of the names. They're so hard to stumble over sometimes.
To everyone that starts out is to, open your Bible, let the audio read it to you, and you'll still get the word of truth rightly divided into you. It's just that it's almost being like fed to you, and you can soak it in as it's being fed to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know because I homeschooled for 21 years, and the more ways you can get it into your brain, the better it stays there. And so to see it, to hear it, that those are 2 ways to get it in rather than just seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my input for it.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's good. That's good. So yeah. In fact, I have to get running. I have to go pick up wife at it would. But yeah, I hope this was a good study. We'll try to either, I'm going to try to decide if I'm going to wrap it up in the next study or in the second to next study. But I'll either do the laws that deal specifically with Israel and God, or I'll do a study on miscellaneous law. Like the laws are just like so out there. They're interesting, but the ones that say you better trim your beard exactly this way, this reason, and we'll find out why.
Dietary,
dietary law, just interesting laws that you're like, why is Israel doing this? But then you'll find out why. Either do that plus the laws on God and wrap that up, or just do the laws on God and wrap it up. But then we'll get into that and we'll see what we can do to do either one last study on the laws or two last studies on the laws and go from there. So, but yeah, we'll wrap up for today, and then chat room's always open, and then we'll continue on we'll be here on Wednesday. So yeah, we'll continue on Wednesday.
See you Wednesday.
bye.
See everyone later.